The Broad Street Review podcast is an extension of Broad Street Review, Philly's home for arts, culture, and conversation, an online arts and culture journal covering the greater Philadelphia area. I'm your host, Darnell Radford.
Today on the podcast, Roger Q. Mason stops by to talk about the world premiere of The Duat on stage at Philadelphia Theater Company through June 23rd. Here is my interview with Roger Q. Mason for The Duat. And welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Darnell Radford, and today I'm in the virtual studio with Roger Q. Mason, who is the originator of the world premiere production, The Duat, which is currently on stage at Philadelphia Theater Company through June 23rd. Roger Q. Mason, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Darnell. It's a great pleasure to be here.
Yes, I was saying, off the recording that everyone I spoke to about you has had nothing but positive things to say about just being in your presence. And so I think that's just such a wonderful thing to just know that when people are just around you, they're like, I feel like I'm in the best place I could possibly be.
You know, my grandmother instilled in me one principle that has stuck with me all this time, which is whenever you enter a room, make sure that everyone who's there knows that they are loved.
Mm.
And to find some positive thing or some connecting idea that binds you to everyone you meet. And that principle has really stuck with me all this time.
Wow, that's beautiful. There's so much we can learn from ancestry, of course.
Absolutely.
So this is your first time here talking to me. So tell us about Roger Q. Mason.
Oh, child, what you want to know about Miss Mason?
Spill the tea, please.
Oh, you want me to spill the tea? Well, my name is Roger Q. Mason. I was born in the mid-'80s in Los Angeles, specifically in Santa Monica, California. And I mention that because LA in that time was really very segregated by real estate geography.
Mm.
And Santa Monica and the west side of LA were known as areas that were predominantly white and privileged. So when I said to people that I was born in Santa Monica, first of all, they didn't believe me because they couldn't conceive of a world in which somebody who was Black, Irish, and Filipino like me would have access to that place. And I knew that I had access because that's where I was from. I had my birth certificate there. I grew up there, between there and Koreatown in LA. And I learned very quickly that we hold a lot of biases and preconceived notions about who's allowed to have access to what. And that my very being would be an existence of defying those expectations on a daily basis. I learned that when I was fresh out of the womb. Everything, Darnell, I remember when I was in preschool, we had this policy at the preschool of taking naps in the middle of the day. I couldn't stand naps then, and I still don't like them now. I have nothing against people who nap. I've heard that it's very good for your nervous system and your cardiovascular health. So if you're supposed to nap, then please do it. But they're just not for me. And so I was at this preschool, and I would sit there and stay up, mad as hell. There I was, 2 years old, analyzing the amount of time wasted on napping. And I walked up to the teacher and I said, ma'am, I shouldn't be napping half of the day. My grandmother is paying you to teach me, not watch me sleep. I can do that at home for free.
Yes.
And Darnell, don't you know they held me back for another year
What?
until I complied with that nonsense?
Oh my God.
And so imagine being 2 or 3 years old, iconoclastic and revolutionary as I was, learning from a very early age that I was going to be a disruptor of the status quo and that people would be upset by the questions I asked of the social condition.
Wow.
I learned that at 2 years old, and my life has not veered from that impulse ever since. I have always looked wrongdoing or ridiculousness straight in the face and said, what kind of nonsense is this? And what systems do we need to put in place to change it?
Wow.
And so for me, the theater has always been a radical site of satirical revision and change. It has always been the place where we can look at our ills as a people and say, how ridiculous is this? And through showing that ridiculousness or that weakness in our mutual culture, I can compel you to change. Because we spend a lot of time avoiding who we are.
Yeah.
So if I put a mirror onto you, now you suddenly have to see yourself. What is it that Michael Jackson said? I'm looking at the man in the mirror. I'm asking him to change his ways.
Yes.
That's a powerful notion to embody as a writer. And, you know, theater, of course, comes from the Greek word theatron, which means the seeing place. So we come to the theater to see ourselves reflected back. Now, a lot of people come to the theater to escape life.
Yeah.
Or to be entertained in some way that feels distant from the troubles of their everyday life. I believe we come to the theater to do important spiritual and social work. And I also trust and believe in the power of audiences to want to do that work with me. I'm not a writer who shies from difficult topics or unsavory ways of telling stories. I think a gut punch to our paradigm is sometimes exactly what we need to make ourselves better.
Yeah.
I don't know what question you asked at the beginning of that rant.
I
But
said,
anyway.
I said, tell us about Roger Q. Mason.
Well,
and you did.
and I sure did. I let you know exactly who I am.
That was all the tea and the crimpets, no crumbs left. Wonderful. So it sounds like you had your artistic mission statement secured at a much early age.
It was shown to me. You know, some people, life shows them who they are.
Yeah.
And I had no choice but to embrace it. That mission statement was further enforced when I discovered, and of course I had no language for it, that I was a genderqueer person. And I had to exist an entire childhood outside of a binary that I had no way of defending myself against. Because we didn't have language for queerness that we have now.
Yeah.
We didn't have visibility on the queer identity and all of its shapes and colors and flavors in the way that we do now. These children coming up now, these legendary children, are in some ways blessed by the blood spilled by the ancestors who had to make a way out of no way. And despite the darkness and the dehumanization and the humiliation that was imposed upon them, they still sparkled and shone bright.
Yeah.
And so I when I talk to young queer folks now and they ask me, oh, what was it like to do such and such? I feel both frightened that I have become a bit of a museum piece, But I also feel triumphant in that the things that I used to struggle with no longer are there in the same way. And that while we have new problems and new issues to bear witness to, at least some of the old ones have faded away.
Yeah, yeah. I know. If you don't take stock, like you don't know, you have to keep track of your own growth. And
Yeah.
sometimes you can get consumed by everything that's pulling focus, and you lose sight of the growth that you gain.
I think that self-examination is one of the singular most important daily activities that we can perform. Every day, I sit up in my bed and do a body scan, and not just the physical body, but the spiritual body. Because before I can move 1 inch, I need to know exactly what's going on. And from that place, I can decide what's next. I find myself often in the middle of a very frenzied work schedule, needing to stop everything just to sit down and ground myself. And yes, I'm one of these people that keeps a paper calendar and I handwrite everything that I have on every, and part of it is a real need to chart my day, you know. But another part of it is a sort of meditation. Just the act of writing down what I'm doing and who I'm serving and how I'm going to help myself that day. It centers me on my mission. You know, there was that documentary on, I think it was Netflix, where they talk about blue zones and the activities and diets and social conditions under which people live to be over 100. And when they were in Japan, they talked about this idea of ikigai, which is one's larger purpose. And the way they defined it seemed to center on a service and a duty to others. That those folks, they opined, lived longer because they had a motivation to live. They were helping and serving their fellow human in some way that transcended physical ailment. That's what we have to think about. When I was in 10th grade, I had a history teacher. His name was Mr. Warburger. And he said, at the end of the year, I'm going to teach you all what the secret of life is. Now, there I was, 15, 16 years old, and I thought I was getting a free pass to Nirvana, because here was this man going to solve all of my problems right now at 15, instead of having to waste a whole lifetime in existential crisis, and he was going to help me right there. And so, of course, you know, I'm a Capricorn, so I'm the strategical analyst, and I wrote down, okay, now what day are we graduate? Okay, great. The end of school is this day. So 2 days before that, our last day of class, I wrote in my calendar book, I'm going to ask this man, what's the secret of life if he forgets? So lo and behold, there we go. It was May or June, can't remember when. And I said, oh, I was supposed to ask him today. Well, he was busy worried about people turning in finals and he had forgotten. So I said, Mr. Warburger, if you recall, several months ago, you promised us something. You would tell us the secret of life. And I'd like you to tell it to us. And he said, okay, Mason, I'll tell you the secret of life. The secret of life is to leave this world better than how you entered it.
Campsite rule.
That was it.
Wow.
And that was something I learned at 15 years of age. And it's never left my mind. It's never left my mind. I don't remember what we learned that year, but I remember that.
Well, that is a great life lesson. I've heard it as the campsite rule, and you know, you walk into every situation thinking about how you can make it better, how you can leave it in a better space than it was when you found it. And
Absolutely.
it is a great way to think about it, because there are a lot of people who, you know, for many reasons, they have some sort of apprehension about their job, where it's like, if the job doesn't pay enough, I'm not going to overachieve at this job. I maybe not give this job 100% of me, because they're not compensating for that. And so we don't realize it's actually more work to withhold our true selves, in those spaces, even though it feels justified to do so.
But also, as we've learned statistically, it's more work on the part of the employer to undervalue somebody's work and contributions to a workplace than to create an environment that justly and fairly remunerates them for their time and expertise, not just monetarily, but also emotionally. Because the most important currency we trade in any workplace is morale. Money comes and goes, but how you make me feel as a member of this team lasts forever. That's the impression I have. If you ask somebody, oh, you left your job, well, why'd you leave? They're not going to say, well, because instead of 1695, they may remember that too, but that's a symptom of a larger neglect.
Yeah.
They made me feel like trash, so screw their asses. That's why I left. It's that emotional currency that people don't think about. And so whenever I also have my own production company. It's called Miss Mason Productions, and I'm saying it here. This is the first time. This is an exclusive for your program. We're talking about it because this is the first time I've talked about Miss Mason Productions.
Great.
It's an organization that is dedicated to producing work that uplifts the underdog, that tells the stories of those who are often silenced and cast aside by the status quo. And whenever I'm doing work, I always think about my people first. How can we make sure that they feel valued and loved and honored before they even start doing anything? That's a principle that I think business in this country could learn a great deal from and learn about, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. I know whenever I wrangle people together for something, whether it's a reading or, anything we all need to come together to do it.
Right.
I'm always overthinking about what I need to make sure they're comfortable. Like simple things is like, I don't know, dietary restrictions. Like, oh, I know this person's going to be late because they're coming from this place. So let's work that in so that they don't run in feeling completely overwhelmed by the fact that they were stuck in traffic and things like that. And those little things, like just caring about people, goes such a long way.
And from a strictly transactional standpoint, if you want to look at life from that perspective, you'll get more out of them if they feel good when they show up. So for those that are looking at life from that point of view, there's also a literal logistical incentive to being good to people.
Yeah.
But the key is not just to perform goodness, but to really mean goodness. And that's the harder work.
Absolutely. I know we could have a conversation that has nothing to do with the Duat.
Absolutely. But yet everything we're talking about absolutely
ties in absolutely
to do with the Duat.
So I know that this is part of your 3-production national tour.
Yes.
Talk about the other pieces and how they all work together.
So this was my first national tour. I was blessed to have gained a lot of visibility and goodwill in the theater business during the pandemic through digital theater storytelling. I had worked with various organizations, including the Fire This Time Festival, Celebration Theater, and 24-hour plays in New York, to build work that people were consuming online. And I was able to reach tens of thousands of people over the course of the 3 years that we were doing this stuff. And I met a lot of beautiful collaborators, including Taby, who would go on to direct this production. I met Taby. She became a digital friend of mine first when we were all living online. And in addition to that, I met Megan Carney, who is the artistic director of About Face Theater. And I also met Eli Urquiza, who was a prominent director in San Francisco. And those folks constituted my first tour. So the first stop on the tour was in March in San Francisco at Theater Rhinoceros. We did a play of mine called The Pride of Lions, which takes place in 1928. And it's about 5 drag queens who go to jail for having done a Broadway show written by Mae West. And they lip sync for their lives and get out, and they maybe kill the warden along the way. Oops. You know how the girls do. And we got a San Francisco Critics Pick for that. And then I went to Chicago, where I worked with About Face Theater on the Midwest premiere of my play Lavender Men. And the director of that production was Lucky Stiff, whom I had gone to graduate school with at Northwestern about 10 years ago. And they created a beautifully, unapologetically queer production of that play, one that was so much about gender and sexual fluidity and positivity. And that went on to get a Jeff Award recommendation, which was beautiful. And now this last part of the tour with Taby and Tyler over at Philadelphia Theater Company with the Duat, I'm happy to say that we are Barrymore Award recommended as of today, which is June 18th. Thank you. And I hear from my publicist, I have a policy. I don't ever want to hear about reviews, but she just said this. She said, I've got a lot of great quotes that I'm pulling. So I take that to mean that people, seemed to have enjoyed themselves. But, going on tour is something I've been doing for a long time. When I was researching for a lot of these plays, I would go on research tour. And I learned a lot about this country through traveling and living and studying amongst its people. The road is the greatest educator we have, and travel is the ultimate school.
Yeah.
So I loved being on tour because in San Francisco, I got to learn, amongst other things, about the difference between gay theater and queer theater, as they define it. In Chicago, I got to learn about the power of understudies, because we had developed 2 companies, and just seeing that the primary company was, of course, fabulous, but seeing how that understudy company really makes the team and draws their own crowd and really builds a fullness around a show was fascinating. And in Philadelphia, I learned a lot about how to build a career within the regional theater system, the League of Regional Theaters, and the important connections that you have to make to community, to boards, to actors, to designers, and most importantly, the power of the collaboration that you have with your director. I mean, Taby is such a beautiful director because she's a great curator. We think about those powerhouse relationships, Elia Kazan and Tennessee Williams, Lloyd Richards and August Wilson, Suzan-Lori Parks and George C. Wolfe. These kinds of relationships, more recently, Robert O'Hara and Jeremy O'Harris. These are relationships built on a trust and a collaborative spirit that is singular and palpable from the page. And what I can say about my creative relationship with Taby Magar as a director is that she's a relentless editor. And the production that you saw was just as much a result of her curation and the efforts, the beautiful efforts of our dramaturg, Gavin Trinidad, as it was my writing. It really does take that triumvirate to make a strong script. And I wish for every writer that they get to have some version of that kind of attention to their work in the years that they make theater in America or beyond, because there's nothing like that kind of support system. That show would not have been quite as sharp-toothed without those two and their objective eye on it. Because
Wow.
I would have gotten you so far, but you lose your objectivity as a writer very quickly.
Yeah.
And so who keeps you honest? Your director and your dramaturg. So I tip my hat to Taby and to Gavin for their efforts on this, as well as that whole team.
Yeah.
That's all. I know everybody's talking now in the reviews and everything about the design. And let me tell you, them motherfuckers. Oh, can I say that online?
Yes.
Okay, great. Them mofo, child, that is an elite fleet of designers. Child, I was like, I have no notes for y'all.
Mhm.
Zero. It was fabulous. Because there was nothing on that stage, and yet there was everything on that stage at the same time. Minimalism is actually much harder to design than maximalism, in my opinion, because you've got to convey a world from the power of suggestion.
Yeah.
And that's not an easy task to perform.
Yeah, it's so sometimes I'm always thinking about, when I ask someone what they think about a show, if they lead with certain things first, then I'm wondering, like, okay, did you like the show, or are you finding elements of the show that you like first? And for this, of course, we walked into the space, and PTC has done this before, where they have produced a show that was completely on the stage in a more intimate style, but when you walk into the space, you don't know what to expect, because you can't see anything. You just hear murmurings of people, and so you get in there, and you're right. There's minimalism there, but there's a lot going on. Like when you look up and you see the grid work for the lighting and everything, and like, okay, there's a lot here. Like the stage isn't just a simple, oh, we just rolled out some shiny material and here we are. Like that's well made too. And then there aren't a ton of props, because there aren't a ton of props.
I think there's one prop. There's the heart.
Yeah.
And the feather. Those are the only two props, and the rest is your imagination. I mean, you the audience create the rest of the show, and language language and scenography are our two primary tools, I think, or in theater making. What I say and where and how I'm saying it, and obviously to whom I'm saying. So, if I were to now, from some vantage point of objectivity, give my own critique of that production, what I would say is that it was able to use the most primal version of visual metaphor to transport people to another world in a way that was arresting, but also cradling, because you weren't estranged from that world so much that you didn't want to go. It was very gentle in how it encouraged you to get there. And it gave you all the tools that you needed: sound, lighting, choreography, so that you would understand who was who and what was what and who was saying. And that's not an easy feat by any means, and also we've got to mention in this conversation the great Dr. Tonde Hunter from Temple University, who was our choreographer, and his beautiful collaboration with the actor Frank X and our drummer MD, who, this is only MD's second show as a theatrical drummer. She's a gigging musician and a session artist and travels a great deal. But she had done I won't say the name because I am superstitious, but I'll call it Miss Whitney White show. She had done Whitney White's piece. Y'all can look up what it's called. She had done Whitney White's show with Taby and Tyler this past year.
Mm.
And she had so much fun that this was her second time. But what's fascinating about her is just how instinctively narrative she is as a drummer. So those impulses made the transition into theatrical scoring, quite seamless. It was as if she'd been doing that her whole life, because her impulses of where to create rhythms and what to underscore and how to punctuate. And one of the things that I really loved the most was a convention that Taby and MD developed together, which is between each of the characters, they would have a punctuating sound, go pop, 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 pop between each of the characters. And after a while, it was so subtle that you kind of didn't pay attention to it until they really, it was just there. But what was fascinating about it was it really separated out the characters in a way that made you, the audience, clear on what you were seeing. But it also added this commentary about the breadth and the depth and the fullness of all the characters he was playing and the rigor of his work, because it created a rhythm around his pace that he had to keep up with. So it made it all the more Olympic of a feat to watch Frank X get up there and go, boom, I'm Mama, boom, I'm this one, boom, and the set, I'll tell you this, I'll give you a little insight. The car sequence where the policeman gets him out of the car.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's only 2 times in the whole play, and both of them relate to Cindy, where there's 3 people. Cindy always be getting Neil in trouble, child. I'm like, why is Cindy out here always getting... Cindy is a mess, child. We love Cindy, but she a mess. But
Cindy's nickname is Who, me?
Who, me?
Who, me?
I didn't do a thing. But Cindy's always the one that has those 3-person scenes. So the key to those was Taby's curation. She said, look, you can only pull that trick a couple of times, and you've got to make it of a specific length. So we kept cutting it to the bare bone until we had found the length of those sequences and the rigor. Because one party, if you notice, in each of them, one party always says less than the other 2.
Yeah.
So that you don't get too confused. So there's a bit of a science to how those things are structured as well. And learning about that was a useful lifelong playwriting lesson for me going forward in that genre.
That's great, and thank you for unpacking that too, because that's like the anatomy of a play, breaking it all down. And, we always hear like the bits and pieces of like, getting started and finishing and then like cutting away. But like, explaining that in the process, it was like a series of edits, like these minor edits to just fine tune the piece. And that is editing. It's like taking out the thes and the ums and the extra breaths and so on.
And I mean, when we started on the first day, our honorary producers were sitting there. Our script was like 2 hours and 10 minutes.
Wow.
And I think the night that you saw it, it was 1 hour and 26 minutes or something. So we had lost like more than 30 minutes of the piece. And you didn't feel it. I mean, I didn't. And the audience didn't know what was there before anyway, so they didn't feel it. But to be an editor who's able to identify what the fluff is with such laser sharp precision is a skill that very few people possess. It's why there are not that many legendary collaborations, because that's the ability for a director to be a new play development director and a storyteller's director, to go in and not just facilitate what you have written, but say, let me see 5 drafts down the road from this moment. Not everybody's doing that.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'll tell you the truth. The draft that we came into this thing with was 40 minutes. So somehow we ballooned it to 2 hours, and then we brought it down. And I was sort of like, because that was an older play of mine, the original version, and I was trying to figure out my way into that piece because I'd been so far away from it for so long. But Taby held on, and she said, "No, no, no, this is the piece. I see where it's going." She was looking at a draft. I'll tell you, it was about 9 drafts later. She was looking at a version of this play 9 drafts and 8 months later. That is prescience, and that is patience.
I was gonna ask, when did the journey start, and where we were in
Yeah.
page structure and so on at the beginning, and how, but you just explained it.
Yeah,
It's
and
just
it
great to
started
see
about
that.
10 years ago. Yeah, I mean, the play started about 10 years ago. It was part of a series of solo shows that I was writing. You know, I'm a child of the Great Recession, so all of my plays sort of love to eradicate the excuses of programmers for why they can't afford to do my work. No, you can afford to have one person on a stage saying some words. You ain't gonna use that one as the reason why you're counting me out. You know, I so a lot of the work sort of has that minimalism baked into it because of when I started in the business. You know, it's just like, you know, our grandmothers who were women of the Depression, they have a certain relationship to money. Even if they've got it now, they
Yeah.
still act like they're in that depression because that was that
Mhm.
seminal moment. Same thing is true with the Great Recession. It changed everything for me and changed how I make work and how I you know, view myself as an entrepreneurial artist and very self-made in that way because no one was producing or commissioning work at that moment.
Yeah.
And I wasn't gonna let the economy stop me from singing my song. It was a song so bright and so full in me, I couldn't help myself.
Yeah.
So I developed an aesthetic of deep collaboration and intrinsic minimalism that took us back to our primordial roots as storytellers. It's Homeric, right? The
Yeah.
campfire. It's one person telling you how day turned into night. And that tale is as old as the human being is on this earth. You know, you look at the caveman and him explaining to the future generations through those petroglyphs, this is who we are, this is where the birds are, this is where the alligators roam, and watch out for that crocodile. You know, all of those types of things. But that's theater.
Yeah.
Theater is just a lesson for survival that we leave now for the future.
Yeah, that right there. That's a great soundbite right there.
There you go.
Okay, let's dig into the Duat.
Yeah.
The
Okay.
first is, the Duat is a mythical Egyptian afterlife.
Right.
I was thinking about, like, growing up learning uh about Egyptian history and so on. Like, I didn't know, I don't know how much of it I processed besides like the surface of everything,
Right.
but I will say that the reference of the Duat in pop culture was recently referenced in the Marvel series Moon Knight.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, wow, like, there were many moments where the space he was in was the Duat. And it was like an interesting story how that whole series plays out. Um, but what sparked, did you have a specific interest in Egyptian culture, Egyptian history? Like, what inspired what became the Duat?
Well, my first impulse is that I wanted to put ancient Egypt on stage
Mm.
because ancient Egypt is the cradle of Western civilization and it doesn't get the credit that it's due. And that happens really because of Darwinism and the need for anglicizing history, which really starts in the 1600s, in the beginning of the modern era, and then, of course, crystallizes when Darwin creates some version of pseudoscience to show why certain cultures are quote unquote superior to others.
Mm.
And along the way, part of that campaign, of course, is that you have to erase the contributions of your darker brothers in the past in order to justify why the current people of color are quote unquote inferior. And so part of the collateral damage of that, of course, is the whitewashing of Egypt and also the erasure of their contributions to society. Now, of course, Egypt is a trade country, and it's a seafaring country, so it's a melting pot, like any country where people are exchanging ideas and goods and services and customs and gene pools through relationships, if you know what I'm saying. So it's not just one thing, but ancient Egypt specifically and its contributions to the religious and the artistic culture of the ancient world have gone largely unnoticed. And so I wanted to write a play that gave credit and credence to the power of ancient Egypt and its contributions to Western theater. You know, the ritual of Isis and Osiris, which is, you know, the original resurrection story. Orpheus takes some cues from it. Is a tale that brought Upper and Lower Egypt together through a yearly ritual of performance. And that's our first recorded instance of public theater. When the ancient Greeks come in and create the theaters, the theatrons, to reflect back to people who they are, they note, Herodotus says, the ancient Greek historian, that Greece owes much to Egypt for its understanding of how to move public opinion through theatrical performance. So I said, we got to put these people back. But the other part of it is that I wanted to be true to the era, meaning the 1960s, the Pan-African 1960s, in which groups like Us.org were citing the philosophy and the culture of ancient Egypt as a source of pride and strength for Black people, but also as an evidence for our originality, singularity, and superiority, and our rightful place in the greatness of world civilizations. And if you think about systemic racism, the way that you really control a people is to demolish them from within. You make them feel as though they are nobody, they are nothing. And so we mentioned Liberia and Marcus Garvey, and we also mentioned Malcolm X. And in each of those rhetorics, there's this notion of someplace else, I was somebody. You in America today may take away my right to vote. You may lynch my brother and my cousin as an example. You may abuse my women and make me feel like I don't deserve to live. But one day I was queen. One day I was king. One day I was priest. One day I was genius. And to that day I shall return if I can survive this one here with you. Yeah. It's about resilience.
Yeah.
And that I wanted to capture that feeling because that's the feeling of the time. Now, then there's a third reason, which is a bit of snarky, dramatic irony, which is here, this play, The Duat, is about a man who snitches on Black people to the FBI. So when he dies, I got to make matters as bad for him as I can. I got to put it in the black afterlife and see what the brothers and the sisters gonna say about him and what afterlife he can have after he's done all this wrong. And of course, the ending is very surprising and speaks to our understandings of radical love as Black people. You know, as Bell Hooks teaches us.
Yeah,
all about love.
Yeah. So tell us about Cornelius Johnson.
What you want to know about Cornelius?
Is Cornelius inspired by anyone?
Yes and no. I mean, Cornelius Johnson is ripped from the headlines in the sense that Cornelius himself is not a real person, but he's inspired by a lot of informants of the FBI COINTELPRO program, which disrupted Black Power endeavors in the 60s and 70s. They would pick on people, largely young, impressionable people with sometimes criminal records, who needed help, who were in desperate straits, and had no alternative but to rat out those in the movement in exchange for some kind of pass, some sort of exoneration from blame of their other social ills. And so there's an FBI file that explains all of the ways in which the Bureau tempted and then ingratiated themselves to young, primarily Black men, and used them as spies to disturb the Black Power movement. He's based on that. In another sense, he's some of the specifics, the cultural specifics, are based on figures in my own family history. Now, you know, this notion of colorism is something that I observed when my grandmother would describe living in LA in 1950s and 60s. And that's a big part of the piece, is how we are so prejudiced against our own, you know, and also this notion of being on the outside, the being on the outside of culture, or the dominant expression of culture. Claudine, who's a Black Power movement, she's a Panther, and when Neil is not so comfortable carrying a gun in '68, which is the year before. Ironically, and I can be quoted on this, or I could stand to be corrected, but I think this whole idea of gun regulation and the NRA actually started because they didn't want Black folk to have guns in the '60s. And now the rhetoric has shifted to the right to bear arms for certain dissonance of our country's democracy.
Yeah.
It's just fascinating to me how we turn and turn and turn again.
Oh.
But to talk about Claudine, she has that quote in the play where she says, she's disappointed that he won't hold the guns. And she says, "Oh, I thought you were more brother than that."
Mm.
And that was an idea that we brought into the piece because we wanted to analyze how people define cultural identity through their affiliations, their actions, and their deed.
Yeah.
Well, what makes you Black enough to do these sort of things? So that was an instance where we found a good opportunity to put that in there. And of course, he gets his comeuppance with her, and she also gets hers with him. And then they meet at the end in that really surprising reunion through a window right before he dies.
Mm.
And he gets a chance for a moment to imagine a life with her that he won't have now because he's, terminally ill. But to me, she's a through line for the piece. And, I mentioned it at the Black Night Talkback. I was like, I was so grateful to our Black femme folks who came and felt as though their story was being represented in this piece. And I said, look, I'm only doing this in the lineage of folks like Alvin Ailey, who came before me and created a ballet called Cry about the power of Black women. Because certainly, as you can tell, I've been surrounded in my life by some sisters who've shaped me. For better or for worse.
Yeah, I think I feel like I can definitely relate to that. I grew up around a lot of strong Black women, and I can't help but think that so much of me is because of them. There are times where I'm in the neighborhood and I can hear a kid say something that I know they heard their mother say.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just the inflection and everything, or it'll be something like, "You get on my nerves."
Mhm, mhm.
And you're like, I know they heard their mom say that.
Yeah. I mean, we can't deny where we came from, even
Yeah.
if we try. It slips out.
So, you know, where we are in this moment, the show will be closing soon.
Yeah.
How are you feeling about the overall production now at this point?
I really miss everybody already. Philadelphia is such a beautiful town to make work. Philly, if you're listening to this, and I know you are, get me my next commission so I can come back because I'm so ready. I'm so ready to come back to Philadelphia. I had such a great time interacting with audiences, interacting with the board members at the theater, interacting with all the restaurant folks. The food is great, interacting with Tavy and Tyler and the whole team. I mean, it was such a Frank, MD. It was such a beautiful experience, and I've been in here back in Los Angeles for about 3 days only, and I miss that show so much. And that's how it was a beautiful experience because it's something I didn't want to leave. I was sad to leave. I did not want to leave you all. I really didn't. I'm so proud of the work that everybody has built. And I read all those those production reports, and I'm cheering with every triumph that Leslie, the stage manager, presents. I'm just so happy.
Well, the bar has been set very high for any future productions of the Duat. Do you see? Are there future productions in the timeline at this point?
So I am starting a process because everything is political and it's all a campaign.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm starting my campaign on the strength and momentum of this production to build the future of the play. There is some interest in New York in the work that I can't talk about right now. But there is interest in New York. I know that there are a few other theater companies in the regional set that are going to be reading it soon. And, my real hope is that this play, as it gets produced around the country, can spark the kind of hearty dialogue and positive visibility that it did in its world premiere right there in Philadelphia. We proved through that production that piece is a universally necessary story that is able to reach across lines of gender, age, sexuality, political affiliation, cultural background, and more. It speaks to the primal need for every human being to be recognized as somebody. And that is something, no matter who you are, that is at the core of what you ask. You wake up in the morning. Am I somebody?
Yes, you are.
Exactly. Yes, you are. You are somebody.
Yeah.
That's where we end the piece, too.
Yes.
And I think that moment is a reminder that we have to tell ourselves all the time because life is so difficult and so unstable sometimes. And sometimes we do forget who we are.
Yeah.
While we're out here in these streets trying to survive.
Yes.
And a play like this, which can remind you that you are somebody, fills that void that sometimes creeps into our souls. And I'm happy that I was able to build a relationship with a team smart and persistent enough to tell that story.
Well, as we draw to a close here, I feel like I have to go take some classes at Cal Arts so I can be part.
Oh my God, let me tell you something. I love the babies. I love the babies. Okay. So I started working there last year and I'm there with the greats. My co-teacher is the great director Amanda Shank. I'm gonna shout out a couple of folks.
Mhm.
I'm there with Daniel Alexander Jones. Okay, I'm there with Mona Heinze. I mean, the Bart DiLorenzo. I mean, the roster goes on and on of the greats that I passed in that hallway.
Hmm.
I grew up going to Red Cat, which is our sort of experimental theater here in LA. It's like similar to in New York. I don't know the equivalent in Philadelphia, but for those that go to New York to see these types of shows like BAM, Brooklyn Academy, or like
Hmm.
St. Anne, this kind of, where the hip cats go to see theater, you know. And I grew up knowing that was affiliated with the university, CalArts, and watching shows there that expanded the frontier of narrative theater. They were avant-garde. And I wanted so desperately to be one of those cool cats. My whole childhood, I would go on the train in LA to watch those shows. So when I finally got the job, it was home for me. I felt right at home. And I was like, aesthetically, these are my people. But yeah, I teach a class over there called World Theater Survey, and it's not what you think it is. It's really a survey of the aesthetic and cultural worlds of theater. And every semester, I keep on my toes. I teach a different set of things with Amanda, and I love it so much. And every semester, the students who are actors, directors, designers, writers, different backgrounds, 18, 19 years old, they're the future of this business. And I'm just there bearing witness to their greatness. Hey, they don't need to learn nothing from me, child. They know it. They know all of it already. They're fabulous. But thank you for acknowledging
Yes.
that I do teach. And also, just so people know, and there's a Philly connection to this, I'm also the new playwriting instructor at Lambda Literary. And
Cool.
that was a position that was previously held by the great Pulitzer-winning playwright, Philadelphia's own James Imes.
Yay.
So I'm very happy. James, if it's all right, I'm gonna be the next you one of these days. Is that all right, bro?
Oh, if we could all be James.
Okay.
Well, Roger, it's been a pleasure chatting with you. I wasn't sure where our conversation was going to go. It's every time I set up for these conversations, I have some general questions so that if the conversation doesn't flow, I can regain control. And just the way everything flowed out of you, like you answered all the questions I had anyway.
Well, I'm glad to have been here, and I had
Yeah.
a great time talking with you,
Yes.
Darnell, and thank you so much for having me on.
Yes, and to our listeners, the production is the Duat. It's a world premiere by Roger Q. Mason. It is directed by Taby. I'm so sorry about Taby's last name.
Magar, Taby Magar.
Taby Magar. Sorry, Taby. We should sit down and chat soon, Taby and Tyler. It's on stage until June 23rd. And please get your tickets and buy two because theater is more fun with a +1. You should definitely get out here if you haven't already been here. And if you've already been here, tell your friends about it and to be a part of this conversation. But Roger, thank you so much for taking the time to unpack all of this. And I really hope that this isn't the last we hear of you in Philadelphia. Everyone who's come across you, like I said, has had nothing but positive things to say. So I'm pretty sure that people are shuffling papers, figuring out how they can continue working with you.
I would love that.
Yeah.
I would love that.
So again, thank you for taking the time. Thank you for being here. Thank you for bringing your art to us here in Philadelphia. And yeah, I think we're just better for it. So the rest of the run, I'm sure, will be a success. Congratulations on the Barrymore recommendation. Oh, there was one other thing I wanted to ask you. As
Yeah.
we're talking right now, it's June 18th, but tomorrow is
Juneteenth. That's
And
right.
yeah, and I just wanted to give you a second to say something about that if you wanted to.
My people are from Texas, so we're the inventors of Juneteenth. Juneteenth is about triumph over other people's lies.
Mm.
They lied that the slaves in Texas had to work an extra 2 seasons.
Mm-hmm.
because the masses down there was greedy as hell.
Yeah.
They knew darn well that those brothers and sisters were free, but they wanted to see how much they could get away with. And unfortunately, I think we are still living in a society where people are still trying to get away with the exploitation of other people. So I look at Juneteenth as a celebration of the dogged insistence on my humanity, despite other people's determination to exploit me otherwise.
Yes. That's a wonderful statement. And I'm so glad that Philadelphia recognizes. I know it's taken a bit of time for the rest of the states to come along and whatnot, but I'm just so glad that it now is getting its due. And it's funny that everything takes so long. Can you just imagine? Can you just imagine being the slaves at that moment? We could have left how long ago? How long?
I mean, here's the thing about trauma, though.
Yeah.
After a certain point, you just become numb. Because the only thing you're trying to do is just survive.
Yeah.
So to then all of a sudden be told, oh, you're free, what does that mean? Some of those generations wouldn't have even known what that meant because they were born into slavery.
Yeah.
So this notion of to be free, this abstract, beautiful principle, a human right, by the way. You know, I saw We the People. I went to the, Continental Congress and all of that. Yeah. I had to go. And the man that did the tour got it right. He was like, when he was talking to people about taxation and he's versus representation. And he said, you all that don't like taxes are not necessarily upset about the paying of the tax. It's about seeing yourself and your value systems represented in the government in which you live. But the truth of the matter is these taxes, they help us build the infrastructure of this country. And without it, we wouldn't have roads and buildings and all of this and that. And he talked about the pliability of the Constitution. He said, let me get this straight with you right now. This is not a purist, inflexible document. They knew it wasn't. They were smart enough to say, if this country survives, 100 years or 200 years, the value systems that we hold now in the 1700s aren't the same. And so they created it to be amended. And he said, we're at a great disadvantage to be purist and say, oh, well, that's not what the Constitution said. The Constitution is what you make it. And that was where he ended, was with Ben Franklin saying, I will leave you with a republic if you can keep it.
Ooh.
That was a powerful tour. I was like, oh, shoot. Some of them wasn't ready. Some of them folk was sweating bullets. They were sweating bullets. But it was beautiful. So anyway, I got to go because I'm on to the next show. I'm on to the next show on here. So I'll chat with you another time, Darnell.
All right, Roger. Thank you so much. It was truly a pleasure.
Such a pleasure.
Thank you to our guests, Roger Q. Mason, for joining us on today's podcast. The Broad Street Review podcast is an Emory production. If you would like to be a guest on the podcast, visit us online at em3ry.com. Get involved with Broad Street Review. Head on over to our website at www.broadstreetreview.com and click Get Involved at the top. While you're there, help keep us running and click Donate to find out how. There you can also find our social media links. Thank you for your part in keeping the conversation going.